Okay, you're recording. I can't say it now.
Okay, it was probably naughty anyway. All right, so let's get started.
Yeah, it was not. I'm not saying anything now.
That's why I love the group. All right, guys, let's get started. So, just
Damon, you frozen.
You are frozen. You're frozen in time. In Israeli holy time.
And then now you're back to it. Okay.
Okay, all right, I'm just changing phone positions. All right, we were missing for a week. We did our last share on the 10th. So, am I frozen at all?
What page are we on now, Damon, by the way? Sorry to interrupt. 95.
95, yeah.
I don't know.
All right.
How's
guys,
that for a guess?
Am I cutting? You're doing well? Are
No, you're not. No, you're fine. Now there's consistency.
We're just waiting for Gavin.
Now Gavin's just going to sit down. I mean, get up. Now you're sitting down.
All right, let's get started, guys. All right. So, bottom line, we're discussing Rabbi Meir's opinion. And by the way, where I was yesterday with Dan davening was at the kever, the grave site of Rabbi Meir in Tiberias. And I put him to fill in there. And I davened there. And it's a very, very special place to go. It's by the Kinneret. If you guys get an opportunity, what's nice about it is these people, after that you learn in the Gemara, where it seems like it's mainly folklore, tales or whatever, these were really real people. And when you go to their grave sites, you see they were real people. So that makes a huge difference in terms of the authenticity and the feeling you've got when you're learning about these people. So Rabbi Meir, whose gravestone I went to yesterday, we're learning about him. All right, so let's get started. Now, what was his issue, guys? I want you to call it back to me. What was his major issue? Off, give it a go.
His major issue is he didn't agree with other rabbis. No. We're talking. Okay, just give me a. I know what you're talking about. So I was thinking, give me a second.
All right. Why do you
Deep
think?
breath.
Let me ask Gavin.
I'll try if Gavin doesn't want to.
No, Kevin, you go ahead. I'm not feeling well today. Actually, I woke up bad. Damon knows about it.
Yeah.
I think I can do it after you, but
okay. So I might be wrong, Damon. I'm going to give it a bash.
So you give it a try.
Rabbi Meir said, I think Rav Shimon said that. Okay, Rabbi Meir said that if the robber or thief steals a cow or a ewe, and he shaves and he shears the wool, he has to give everything back. He can't benefit from anything.
Excellent.
I think that's what Rabbi Meir said.
Excellent. So what he said, okay, so let's focus only on Rabbi Meir at the moment. So he said, look, if there is a pregnant cow and it gives birth to a calf, it doesn't matter whether the cow was pregnant, it's not, it's a calf, it's separate, there's a ewe, it's shearings, whatever proceeds or benefits you got or byproducts from the original stolen article needs to be returned. Now the Gemara is saying there can only be two reasons for this. What are those two reasons? All right, let me put you guys out of your misery. Reason number one is that Rabbi Meir holds that a physical change remains in its place, meaning it doesn't affect acquisition for the thief. Because the whole reason why the thief keeps it is because if it doesn't resemble the item that he stole, he has to give the financial equivalent back, but he can get to keep the article. Okay? Now, it's based on a biblical reasoning and a rabbinical reasoning. The biblical reasoning is as follows. It says a pasuk that repeats the word about stealing, and at the end talks about if he stole. So why repeat the statement? Because we learn that there's no redundancy in the Torah. Every word is useful. It's coming to say that if it doesn't resemble that which he stole exactly, he gets to keep it and replace the financial equivalent to the original owner. So if the article is no longer extant, as the Gemara says, or no longer in existence, and it's broken or stolen or lost, money has to be replaced. It's the same thing if the physical properties change. So that's the first issue, the biblical. Then you have the rabbinic, and that issue is an issue of teshuvah. What do we mean? Is we quite clearly said that if you go to Builder's Warehouse and you steal a whole lot of wood and nails and glue and etc., and you take those raw pieces of wood and a couple of raw materials and you spend the weekend creating your furniture, and suddenly Monday morning you're feeling shocking that you did the wrong thing and stole it, you don't have to disassemble your furniture, because most people are not going to lose a weekend's worth of labor they so lovingly put into their own furniture, because then the guilt will go away when you've got to go through all of this again. So what the Gemara allows for is when it's changed to that extent where it's a finished board even, or certainly if it's unplaned and you plane the article and it doesn't physically resemble. But but that's biblical. Even the rabbinic kicks in, which when it's a reversible change where you've got planks of wood and they can be removed from a table in order to be those planks of wood, which means a reversible change. But even though that's not biblically prohibited, or has a biblical problem, rabbinically, we're trying to aid the thief to make it a teshuvah, because he's not going to want to go through that effort, even if it can resemble the original, or is reversible, and therefore he can give the financial equivalent. So that is the concept of a physical change affecting acquisition for the thief. So that could be a reason that Rabbi Meir says that it all goes back to the original owner, because this animal now has changed in its physical properties. Why? Because if it's a pregnant cow, and now the cow is not pregnant, or if you have a fetus and it never resembles the calf, and the same with the ewe in its own respect, then it's a physical change, and therefore the robber can keep it and pay the financial equivalent. So what is the reason that Rabbi Meir makes the thief return both the stolen article and its byproducts? It could be A, that he doesn't hold that the physical change affects acquisition for the thief, and therefore the returning of the objects and the sharings would make sense, or alternatively, it could be because he doesn't want the thief to benefit in all, and therefore it's an added stringent penalty, at which Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon don't hold by. So what the Gemara wants to know is, okay, so we understand there could be two separate reasons, but what is the implication? And as Gavin quite rightly said the other day, it is a practical difference between a case where the animal underwent a physical change to the detriment of the original owner, such as deterioration.
Okay. Thanks, Wendy. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
No problem, such as deterioration, because if somebody stole my animal and I looked after it very well and it came back and it was almost in a state of death from malnutrition and dehydration, then I could turn around and say, you keep the animal. I just want the cash of what the animal was worth. Now it looks like it's worth 80 zuz on the border of death, and it was worth 150 zuz before you starved this animal half to death. So I'm losing out. And the thief could say, listen, I stole your animal. It's returned as it is. And that can only be if people hold by Rabbi Meir's opinion, and they say the reason for his opinion is a physical change doesn't affect acquisition. Because if the physical change of the deterioration doesn't affect acquisition for the robber, he can return it in its deteriorated state. Which means this doesn't work well for the original owner. It only works well when the animal appreciated in value. Because you have a wool that's grown off a sheep or ewe, and you have a case where you had a fetus that's now developed as a calf. So the appreciation to the original owner, if that comes back, as well as all the byproducts to the original owner, is gaining. But he's losing in this case. So we're saying that's the practical difference. But if the reason that Rabbi Meir did it was a penalty, so that the thief cannot get away with with both making a profit in the times of appreciation, nor saddling the original owner. I made a pun, Kevin, on the word saddling, of course. Saddling. Just a joke for Kevin. I
think you ran too far today.
Yeah, hang on. The reception, is it bad? Can you hear me, guys? Guys, can you see me now?
It's up and down, but it's carry on. It's more up than down. We can see you.
Okay, so what I was saying is,
Damon, continue.
in the case of appreciation, the original owner is happy. No sort of profitability on byproducts becomes part of the robber's acquisition. But when the animal deteriorates, it's going to backfire on the original owner, because the robber can return a deteriorated animal and say to the robber, change never affected acquisition. It was a fat animal, now it's skinny, but I'm returning your animal, and therefore, who loses out? The original owner. That's if the reason why Rabbi Meir says this, Kevin, is that if a change doesn't affect acquisition, physical change, then the original owner will lose out in depreciation. Okay, do you get what I'm saying? But in appreciation, he will still gain. But he'll lose on the one and gain on the other. But if it's a penalty that Rabbi Meir poses on the thief, the original owner will benefit no matter what. Because if the animal appreciated in the robber's care and gained additional value on the profitability of a fetus to a calf, then it all goes back to the original owner. He benefits. Then Rabbi Meir can take away that penalty with regards to an animal that deteriorated and say, no, to the robber. You've got it in that sorry state. Now you're keeping that animal and you're giving the full value at the time of the robbery. So what that's going to do is that's going to teach the thief a lesson, not cause the original owner loss. And he's going to make sure he doesn't abuse animals in future, because it's going to cost him severely. Right, guys, so do you see the difference in the reasoning's outplay? Guys, I don't know how much I've got you, how much I'm losing you.
No, you predominantly got us. You just use us fractionally, but you predominantly in. It's fine. Continue.
Okay, so good. So now we want to know, well, how do we resolve the inquiry? So what happens is we have to go to a Mishnah, and it's in a daf we're going to cover soon. And it says, if one stole an animal and it aged, slaves and they're aged, the thief pays the value at the time of the robbery. So what does it mean? Is that aging? This is a problem. It's even worse than the case of a cow that you let deteriorate. Why? Because there are certain rabbonim that say that for a reversible change, there is no problem with regards to it being returned, because it's fixable. Do you get what I'm saying? It's certainly not a biblical prohibition. It might be a rabbinic prohibition, but it's not permanent. So we're saying, hang on, in order to satisfy all opinions, we have to look at a state of deterioration that is not reversible. So malnutrition isn't one of them. So what could we be talking about here as a case of aging? Is that is an irreversible, detrimental change. Ask anybody that's dating. And in that particular case, it means the value is deteriorating. So what's happening here is that it says, according to Rabbi Meir, okay, so let me just read the Mishnah. If one stole an animal and it aged, or slaves and they aged, he pays their value as at the time of robbery. Now, Rabbi Meir says on this Mishnah, with respect to slaves, the robber may say to the original owner, behold, what is yours is before you. Meaning that it's a different case with slaves. Can anybody tell me what we went through and why that is different with slaves as opposed to an animal?
Slaves is.
Sorry, Kevin. Go.
Kevin, go ahead. No, Kevin, if you're strong, go. I'd rather you do it.
Slaves are always. I read something the other day. Slaves are always considered belonging to the owner. Does this have anything to do? They can't change ownership. Does this have, and slaves are like almost like fixed property, or they're like movable property?
I'll take your answers correct.
Is it something to do with that?
Yes, it is. I'm going to tweak one or two words, but I think you did very well. So slaves are like land; they're like real property, which I think, as a definition, is like fixed property,
immovable. Yeah,
immovable. Okay, why? Because if somebody steals your land, they can't really steal your physical land. They can take the title deed, but you can't put land in your pocket. So slaves are in the same legal category. So if you're stealing a slave, it's not really considered theft. So if he aged at the time of slave, the original owner wants to complain and say, well, he lost years of service. Well, it was the original owner's because there was no transfer that took place. According to those opinions that see slave as real property or fixed property. So in that particular case, Rabbi Meir agrees. But if he singled out slaves and he never singled out a stolen animal, the inference from that, guys, means that with respect to a stolen animal that has aged, however, he agrees with the Tana Kamma, which is the anonymous majority rabbinical opinion, that the robber acquires it and pays its value at the time of the robbery. Okay. So what does that mean? In other words, you've got an objection only to part of the statement of one category. But Rabbi Meir said, if Rabbi Meir could have just turned around and said, listen, I don't agree with you that you pay the slaves at the time of the value of the robbery. He could have said, you pay the value of the stolen slave as well as the stolen animal that aged at the time of the robbery. And that would have proven that it didn't matter how much time passed and the slave deteriorated. That physical change never effected acquisition for the robber, and therefore the robber would have to pay the full value at the time of the robbery. The very fact that Rabbi Meir only has an objection to the slaves because they're fixed property, not movable property, means that he agrees with the Tana Kamma that movable property does effect acquisition, it would seem, from a physical change, because he's not returning that aged animal to the original owner. He pays the value of that original owner's animal at the time of robbery before it aged. So that's a proof that the physical change of the animal years later didn't mean the slave kept it. It meant that the slave did keep it, and then he has to pay the money at the time of the robbery, which means physical change does affect acquisition, according to Rabbi Meir. That's what it seems to infer. Can you see that, guys? Do you want me to repeat the last statement?
Go through that one more? Yeah, that last statement. I am listening, but that was quite tricky. Just repeat that last statement.
Yeah, I think, Damon, do you mean the robber keeps it or the slave keeps it? Did the slave steal the animal or the thief steal the animal?
Okay, it's an excellent question.
Originally.
So when we look at this Mishnah that's coming up, what it's saying is if a thief or a robber stole an animal and it aged, and slaves and they aged, he pays their value at the time of the robbery. So let's look at this. If somebody aged or somebody's animal aged, are they worth more or less after 5 years?
Yes.
Why? Because they can't do the work they did when they were younger and stronger, correct? Correct. So therefore, that when Rabbi Meir says that when the Tana Kamma, which is the majority rabbinic opinion, which is anonymous, as well as Rabbi Meir, don't seem to dispute this case with the animals at all, it means that the physical change does affect acquisition, because it's saying that the robber is not returning the animal or the slave, according to the Tana Kamma, to the original owner after 5 years. Why not? If a change doesn't affect acquisition, he can return it as is if the animal aged or the slave aged. But the very fact that he has to pay money at what that slave or animal was worth at the time of the robbery means that something's changed. Otherwise, he could just give that animal slave back, which means there's a physical deterioration. Now, who's lumbered with the cost? The robber. Because the robber keeps the deteriorated animal and slave, and he refunds the full value at the time when that animal slave was worth more because it was younger, which means a change does affect acquisition. So far, we're leaning towards Rabbi Meir, showing that a physical change does affect acquisition, and therefore, if it does affect acquisition, it must be that is imposing a penalty. So far, it would seem that way. Why? Because, how do we know? Because when Rabbi Meir has an objection with the Tana Kamma about slaves, he's not arguing with the concept. He said, look, slaves are a different issue, because slaves are like real property and you can't steal them. It's like you steal a title deed, but you can't move the land and put it in your pocket. So since that is the case, in the case of
delivery. Okay, I'm coming. Sorry,
Okay,
some
well,
delivery here. Sorry, just give me a second.
no
Sorry.
problem.
Sorry.
No problem. Arthur, you tired?
Yeah, I'm very tired. I got to work before 7 o'clock this morning. I got up at 6, had a shower, shot to work. Finished at 3 though, so I'm okay. And tomorrow I'm working again from 7 through to 5. And then Wednesday I'm working till 7 in the morning till 7 at night. And then Thursday I'm working from 10 till 5. And then Friday I'm doing a 24-hour shift, literally from the morning till Saturday. The woman's going to hospital for a backup, so she's supposed to be with her husband. But I'm coming back after Shabbos to spend some time with family, and then the next morning I'm going back for like 3 days till like Wednesday morning till I come to you. That's my whole week. I'm not coming home at all. Lady's not happy with it, but
Arthur, you're still working with that guy, the guy who was the cyclist.
no,
I'm
not
with that guy.
not anymore. He's actually gone home, and he's gone too far from me. He's like 20-something k's from me now. I had to look on maps. I said, I'm not going there.
Let's get back. Guys, let's get back. Guys, let's get back to the show. Sorry. All right, Gavin, you with us?
I'm with you guys.
All right. So what we are saying is as follows. If something deteriorated and aged, and you don't hold that physical change affects acquisition, then even if the slave or the animal deteriorated, you should be able to, after 5 years, return it to the original owner and say, what is yours is before you. The very fact that that's not the case, according to the Tana Kamma, means the Tana Kamma, which is the general opinion, before we bring Rabbi Meir into it, is proving that physical change does affect acquisition. And that's why the robber keeps the animal and he pays the value at the higher level of what that animal or slave was worth when it was younger and stronger. Okay? Now, you would expect Rabbi Meir, who's the opposing opinion, to disagree with the Tana Kamma. He doesn't. The only part he disagrees with is with regarding slaves, because he says slaves can't be stolen. So since it can't ever be stolen because it's like real property, it never becomes the robber's anyway. So it remains, even if it aged, it's unfortunate for the original owner. It was kidnapped, but never stolen in the sense that it became the robber's property. Do you get what I'm saying? It's like kidnapping a child. It always belongs to the parent. It might change location. So the thing of it is, in that particular case, that's the only argument Rabbi Meir has against the Tana Kamma. But if he only has an argument with the slave issue, it infers from that, the Gemara is saying, that there's no argument that Rabbi Meir disagrees with the Tana Kamma regarding an animal. So he's saying there, same as the Tana Kamma by inference, that he never brought up the issue of the animal, that he concurs with the Tana Kamma and agrees that the animal that deteriorated is kept by the robber, and what that means is that the penalty is paid to the original owner of what that animal was worth at the time that animal was younger and stronger. Okay, so that is a proof. It would seem that Rabbi Meir holds that a change does affect acquisition. It's proving it. Okay, why? Because if the change didn't affect acquisition, the robber could 5 years later return the cow back and say, well, I'm sorry, your cow's so weak in age now, but it's yours before you. But the very fact that it deteriorates implies a physical change, and therefore, since the robber has to recompensate the owner at the time of its maximum strength of the timeline of the robbery, means the robber keeps the animal due to the physical change, so that the original owner doesn't lose out, and he gets the animal's value at its prime value when it was strong and young. So therefore, change affects acquisition according to Rabbi Meir. Okay, so what that therefore means is it's pretty straightforward. It says that then it's obvious that the only thing that's left is that this is a penalty by Rabbi Meir. Does that make sense? It seems to be a penalty. Because in our particular case, he chooses when there's appreciation, where the robber could earn money. Now, that appreciation means a physical change, but it's a physical change to the benefit of whom? The robber. Now, so Rabbi Meir is saying no. It would seem from this that he says the robber's just not going to profit from this. He has to return both the animal and its byproducts, and the robber doesn't get any improvement to keep any sort of profitability. So it's proposing this as its line of reasoning with this Mishnah as its proof. And the Gemara objects to its own argument. Why? It says because maybe you misunderstood that previous Mishnah as used as a proof. Because it could be that Rabbi Meir, in his response that disputes the rabbis only with regard to slaves, he wasn't presenting his own opinion, guys. He was just simply stating an objection to the rabbis, even in accordance with their own opinion, as follows. Okay? You get what I'm saying? So it's saying, when you first read it, when I read it to you a few minutes ago, the way the Gemara presents it, you think that Rabbi Meir is arguing with the Tana Kamma, and he's putting in his opinion, that he's agreeing with the Tana Kamma in terms of animal and deterioration, but a slave is seen as a different category. So it would say that it seems that Rabbi Meir is agreeing with the Tana Kamma, and therefore a physical change affects acquisition. But the Gemara is saying you can read that Mishnah in a different way. You can read it in the way of saying, listen, according to me, dear rabbis, this is what Rabbi Meir could be saying. So imagine Rabbi Meir saying, okay, imagine Rabbi Meir turning around and saying, according to me personally, change doesn't affect acquisition. So even if a stolen animal that depreciated on account of a physical change can be returned to the original owner in its present depreciated state. But according to you, dear rabbis, that say that change does affect acquisition, you've got to at least concede to me that in the case of a slave, that is like land, and land cannot be legally stolen. So even if the stolen slave undergoes a physical change of aging, the robber doesn't acquire him at all, but returns him to the owner as is. Do you get what I'm saying? So he's saying, listen, I'm actually disagreeing with you. I'm saying that change doesn't affect acquisition. I'm quite happy to return the animal to the original owner. But you having an argument and say it belongs to the robber and he has to make full compensation and restitution at the time of robbery. So even if that's your opinion, dear rabbis, what are you going to do with the case of a slave who's seen as fixed property, as land, that cannot ever leave the legal ownership of the original owner. How would you answer that? So it seems now that that's not a proof that Rabbi Meir is holding that a change does affect acquisition, because in this explanation, he's saying, I don't. You rabbis do, and therefore I'm bringing an objection to you based on your own argument. So when he poses this question to the rabbis say to him, no, slaves are like movables which can be stolen. We don't see them as fixed property. And therefore, when they age and undergo physical change, the robber acquires them because of the deterioration and must pay their full value at the time of the robbery to the original owner. So if you interpret the Mishnah like that, again, same Mishnah, different interpretation, we haven't come to a foregone conclusion. So the Gemara has to come to another point at which to draw a conclusion, and it says, look, you've got to learn a resolution from a different Mishnah. That Mishnah is in the 100th daf, not in the 96th daf. And it said if one gave wool to a haberdashery and all right, guys, so what we are saying is up until this point in the Gemara, we said that Rabbi Meir, we don't know if he's agreeing with the rabbis or just saying to the rabbis an obtuse argument according to their own argument and actually disagreeing with them. There's no conclusive proof. It depends how you read it. So it's not a proof that Rabbi Meir holds whether a change affects acquisition or does not affect acquisition. We don't know. Depends how you read that Mishnah. He could be stating his own opinion as an objection, which is bringing an objection to the rabbis according to their own opinion, with a contradiction of a slave being seen as fixed property, at which Zadie objects, and the Tana Kamma, rabbinical opinions, feel it's movable. So that's not a proof for a change affecting acquisition at all. So we have to get it from the 100th Mishnah. So what we were saying is, come learn a resolution from the following Mishnah. If one gave wool to a dyer and instructed him to dye it for him red, and he dyed it black, we instructed him to dye it black, and he dyed it red, Rabbi Meir says he pays the owner the value of his wool. This implies that the value of his wool, yes, he pays, but the value of the wool and its improvement, which is now escalated in value, no, he does not pay. Okay? Now we see from that is that Rabbi Meir holds that if raw wool was worth 100 zuz, right? And now it's processed, it's worth 140 zuz, for example, 50 zuz. Then the appreciation is kept by the person that's done the dyeing, because he put in a bit of labor and he also spent money on raw materials. And the truth of it is, and this is the bottom line, is that he didn't do it as what you call a premeditated robber. Yes, it ended up costing money in the sense that he misheard instructions. So all he has to do is give that value of the raw wool back to the original owner so that the original owner isn't losing any profit. But that extra profit he made after all his effort, when he could in fact find a buyer for the color that he misunderstood, he's entitled to keep because he didn't do it on purpose. And therefore, that's a proof to the fact that it's a penalty, because it says, and if it should enter your mind to say that Rabbi Meir holds that a change does not affect acquisition, then he would need to return to the owner the value of both his wool and its improvement. Okay? So which means that if there was no effect that changing the dye had on the actual article itself, if that didn't affect who it belonged to, what would happen is the dyer would return it in its improved state to the original owner. But because it has made a physical change, it becomes the possession of the robber, in this case inadvertent, the dyer that didn't listen to instructions properly, but the financial equivalent of the raw wool, what that is worth, he pays the owner of the raw wool. So rather, learn from this that Rabbi Meir holds that change does affect acquisition. And his ruling here, guys, is different to the first brisa that we learned. Because in the first brisa, Rabbi Meir is saying that the robber must return the offspring and the shorn wool or any byproduct from the original theft, and it's a penalty that Rabbi Meir imposes. Why? Because in the case when somebody accidentally makes a mistake by not hearing, we make sure, yes, he returns the money to the original owner, but he doesn't have to lose money on the labor he put into dyeing it the wrong color, nor the raw materials. He gets to keep that improvement and hopefully recover his costs by selling it to somebody that in fact would need red dyed wool as opposed to this guy that requested black dyed wool, because it wasn't done on purpose. And that physical change did affect acquisition. We learned this from this principle, otherwise that colored wool would be returned to the original owner. So it's proving that why isn't the original owner given back the wool with improvement? Because it wasn't done on purpose. Whereas with the robber on the issue of the first brasa, that was a criminal. And therefore we know that Rabbi Meir, number one, holds that a change affects acquisition, which means in the case where the animal deteriorated, he could remove that penalty to make sure that it didn't work in the robber's favor, and that he would keep the deteriorated animal and pay the higher value of what the animal was worth in the robbery. But he could enforce the penalty when there was profit to be made by the robber in appreciation, when there was a fetus to a calf, etc., and more wool because the wool had grown. And when that penalty is invoked, in the case of appreciation, the robber loses out and the original owner gains. So because we learned it's a penalty and change affects acquisition, Rabbi Meir can apply it where he sees fit. I'm done. I kept within my time.
Well, thank you.
And also, Damon, I mean, if
Yes,
someone wants colored wool, I mean, if it's dark red or dark, they may not mind anyway if the colors are slightly different. You know what I mean?
correct, but then there's nothing.
It may not make a difference to them.
Correct, then there's no argument tomorrow.
Because the wool's not being pulled over their eyes anyway.
The wool's not being pulled over their arse.
Okay, I'm going to read. So Damon, okay, actually, I listened to your advice, Damon.
Just hang on. Kevin's going to read to us because that previous.
Okay, so so we're going to do. Okay, so in this week's Parsha Vayera, which is the second reading of Shmot, which is the new book we started last week. It's this week's Parsha is when Aaron and Moshe plead with Paro to free the Jewish people, and they threaten him. Hashem is going to send plagues if he doesn't let the people go. And various plagues are sent are placed on the Egyptians, and Pharaoh says he'll let them go. Then Hashem hardens his heart and he changes his mind. And one of them, which I saw when I was reading the Parsha on Shabbos afternoon, the fourth plague is the swarm of the wild beasts. So the wild beasts came in to Egyptians' homes, and they even snatched infants, and they probably ate them or killed them. And while this was happening in the land of Goshen, the Jews, where nothing happened to them, and Pharaoh knew that. As far as I know, he knew that. So it was only happening to him. So the point I wanted to make was, if people have such egos and have such arrogance, even to their own detriment, they'll let things happen so that they can still dig their heels in. This is what illustration what Paro did. He thought, he didn't think that Hashem existed in the world, and there are people that we've come across in our lives that think they are Hashem in the world, and they exist, and with their ego. And I'm not saying they will go to such extremes like this, but just to prove that you're right, I'm right at all costs. Other people can be collateral damage.
You making a good point is that
Even
very good.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
that was very good.
That was good.
Yeah, guys.
Guys, have a wonderful.
I just thought